Hey guys, welcome back to the channel today. We're very excited to bring you this video today. Got something a little bit different down the pipe this week. Got good friend from Central Wisconsin, Chad Maves, on here. If he's a familiar face to you, it's because he was actually did a lot of filming, producing with us over the years, and has gone to do a lot of different other things in the hunting industry now. Has a lot of expertise in the topics we're going to be talking about today. So I wanted to bring him on because he's a wealth full knowledge when it comes to food plotting and managing whitetails. So glad to have Chad on. I just want to talk a little bit about your expertise in this field before we dive into our discussion today.
As Mike said, I'm Chad. I've worked for a land management company. I'm going into my 12th season. I've planted, I don't know, averaging 600 acres a year for the last 12 years, all over the state of Wisconsin, including a bunch of neighboring other states. So I've seen every type of ground there is to see. I've been on properties, some properties for all 12 years of that. So I get to see how things work, how they don't work, and I get to deal with hundreds of different clients every year, and I get to see a lot. So that's given me a lot of knowledge over the years.
And I mean, obviously, as you've gone through some of them properties, you see all the good and the bad and everything that goes along with food plotting. And that's going to bring us to our main topic of discussion today is why won't my food plots grow? There's obviously a lot of different reasons for that, but we just wanted to get Chad on here to give his expert advice as to why, if you're putting in the time, money, effort, whether it's a spring plot or a fall plot, why it might not be turning out.
Yeah, as Mike said, there's always exceptions to rules, so I'll go with most common things. And one thing I like to use a lot with guys, if God's not growing something there, you shouldn't try. So a lot of interior wood plots, if there's not weeds or any type of undergrowth, usually you don't have enough sun coming in there. That's always a good starting point. So I would eliminate some trees. You need some sunlight to get stuff to grow. That being said, you can get stuff to grow in shade, but most cases it's not healthy. You'll get nipped on once and it'll never grow back. So you're just wasting time and money. If you got just grown in a field or you got an area cleared, my first step is always doing a soil sample. You need to know where your nutrients are at. You need to know where your pH is at. It's not always just throw a bunch of fertilizer down, throw a bunch of lime down. Half the time you're wasting money doing that. You're better off spending the 40, $50, get your test, know where your soil's at, and make the corrections that will be recommended. So if you start with there, most cases you're in a real good spot. A big part of my job is managing expectations, and I think that's kind of a downfall in the industry. Everybody sees videos and pictures of premium food plots planted in premium ground, and a lot of stuff guys are working with is ground farmers don't want. So you got to know you're most likely starting out with pretty poor soil, so you got to kind of expect your or manage your results according. You just don't see something on TV, see something on the web, and hope your beans or whatever you plant are going to be 3 feet tall and look spectacular. Like it's going to be what you add to it. It's a process, and you gotta follow that process. So every year you could build your soil, get it better, but conditions matter big time. You can't compare soil in northern Wisconsin to soil in southern Wisconsin. It's two different worlds, and you're going to get way different results. And everything is weather dependent. Also, if you're dealing with sand and you don't get any rain, nothing's going to grow. On the flip side of that, if you got really wet, heavy ground, and you get a really wet, rainy year, crops are going to struggle. It's the toughest part of my job is guys are always comparing their food plots to farmers' fields. So it's managing expectations is huge on the type of ground you have, which if you have your soil sample and you get appropriate weather, you can pretty much grow anything you want to grow depending on your budget.
Now, one thing you touched on right away was sunlight, especially in timber setting. That's something I want to lean a little bit more on with your expertise because I have food plots that in some situations where I plant in the timber. Some years they turn out, some years they don't. What realistically, like how much sunlight are you needing during the daytime in the timber to ensure that those plots are going to grow?
It varies. Clover is probably one of the more shade tolerance. I like to see I'm hoping for at least 3 to 4 hours of good sunlight on that. If you're going, I don't prefer brassica blends on a small kill plot in the woods, but like cereal grains, they'll grow without sunlight. I've watched them germinate in the toolbox of my semi truck with just some moisture, but they're just yellow, unhealthy looking plants, so they can't handle any grazing pressure. I like half a day of sun if I can get it on my food plots. So, I mean, most cases it's taking some trees down, just knowing where the sun's going to be the time of year you're planting just to get optimal sunlight in there. Anywhere from 3 to 6
Mm-hmm.
hours, I would say, would be enough.
Mm-hmm. Two other scenarios I want to kind of throw at you. You obviously are familiar with my family property back in Wisconsin, and it's a very wet soil area.
Yep.
And we struggle with growing corn and beans a lot of times in those plots. Um, what sort of suggestions in areas for people that come with a lot of wet soil would you recommend as far as like food plot varieties?
It that a lot comes to your budget. Like in your property around that central Wisconsin area, it's wet, heavy soil. You get wet years, wet springs where that could happen last year. There's areas of the world where farmers 80% of the crops don't get in the spring. So it's always a risk. If you get a dry spring, get your crops in, but then get 4 or 5 inches of rain on that ground, your crop drowns out and there you sit. So I've got
Mm-hmm.
some properties. It depends on the budget. If you want to give it a go, there's always some risks involved. I have some guys that have really wet properties in the spring. We just plant them in the fall just because it's not worth the risk. It's in any food plot setting, it's just like farming, and we can't put crop insurance on a crop. So you're still
Yeah.
reliant on the weather, especially depending on what kind of ground you have. So guys that we've done in the past, if you have the budget for it and you have a wet field, you can do some excavating work to get water off, drain water, pitch it. I mean, I've never drain tiled a food plot for a guy, but we've definitely done ditches, done certain things to make a field plantable in the spring. So that's an
Okay.
option too, but you start doing that, that is not a budget friendly food plot necessarily, but it's still
Mm-hmm.
improvement to the land. Any type of work like that is just investing in the land. And I tell most guys, you're going to get that back out if you would happen to ever sell. Was any improvements? I mean, anybody coming in to buy would love that. So
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Kind of opposite end of the spectrum. Living down here in Iowa now, I've been fortunate enough to plant food plots the last couple years, and it is a totally different situation compared to back in Wisconsin. A lot of our food plots I'm putting in our fall food plots, and the biggest issue I'm running into down here is when I put them in late summer, it's still extremely hot that time of year. We're not usually getting a lot of rain, and some of the issues I get with these plots is they come up, they start looking good, and then they just burn right out. Uh, I've even noticed this in my garden. Have been doing a decent amount of gardening down here the last couple of years. But if I plant anything like mid to late part of June, it just gets fried out unless it's already established. A couple of the ideas that I was thinking of coming up with was maybe I start planting these fall plots earlier in the summer, or I was just kind of wanted, your insight on that. What I could do to get a better food plot down here, and maybe be planning it at a different time, or what would you recommend?
yeah, you have a couple different options there. Like down in Iowa, I mean, if you could like get a bean crop in, I mean, you could be planting down there heck, almost right about now, depending on soil temperature, but you could be planting late April even. I don't like to go too early in a food plot setting because again, we don't have crop insurance like a farmer does. So if you get a late frost, which tends to happen sometimes, you're going to lose a crop if you plant it too early. So that's why we usually plant later. But in some
Mm-hmm.
situations like that, like if you could do a little bit of a cover crop, like even get beans in, and then you could do a fall crop right into your beans, and your beans will provide some cover for that crop to come as the
Yes.
beans then
Yeah.
defoliate. You'll get stuff growing up in. But say you don't have a budget for beans, then yeah, I would definitely plant later. Like even brassicas, I wouldn't be planting down there at the end of July. That's too early. I mean, you could be planting. in Iowa, heck, you could plant cereal grains probably to the middle of September pretty easily. You could be putting
Yeah,
brassicas in,
absolutely.
I think, towards the end of August and still have a pretty good crop. That's one of the things I deal with guys is they want to always get stuff in early, and they want turnips the size of softballs, if not bigger. And you think about it from uh, take your garden for example. You don't want a radish that's gigantic because it's going to be all woody. That's not highly desirable food. So planting early isn't necessarily better. Yeah, you might get a bigger, cooler looking food plot, but it might not be as sought after by the deer because it's old and mature. Younger plants are way better to eat.
One thing I thought you said was interesting was playing the beans, and then putting something in that. One of my best food plots this last year was actually a mix where I put some Dirty Bird from Domain, which has your sorghum, it has beans in it, millet, and I want sunflowers and something else. I can't remember what all exactly is in it, but it's a mix of that. Um, I planted that kind of on the later end of the summer. I wanted to get it in early, but we had some issues with rain. Um, but I planted it in beginning of August. So obviously, like the sorghums didn't really head out very much, but it provided shade for the beet. I put beets in it also, so it shaded out a lot of that um, and allowed the beets to just flourish in that food plot. Like it was, I had come October, I kid you not, I had leaves up to almost my waist um, in beets
Yep.
and everything else in that plot. And the deer just absolutely hammered it last year. Um, the one thing I had going for me in that situation, though, is it was on an east facing slope. I had timber to the east. So probably the first few hours of the day, it was shaded. And then in the evenings, the last probably hour and a half, 2 hours, it was shaded. So it was getting direct sunlight during the day, but some of the hottest points of the day or in the afternoon, it was shaded out. So I think that obviously helped it out quite a bit. But also getting something established that could grow and help keep that moisture in the soil and keep it from burning out. I think that really made a difference in the success of that food plot.
Oh, for sure. You could. So we do on a lot of our sandy soil. We call it a spring builder mix. We'll have some beans. We've done some different cereal grains. We've been playing around with it quite a bit. Buckwheat is really good because it matures really quickly. It's mature in 60 days. And I actually did a test on it on a really new does sandy plot last year, and it's in Iowa you could do the crimping thing. It's hard to do it in Wisconsin because you need to do it at certain stages when the plant's at a certain stage, and the way our growing season sets up, it makes it difficult. But if you can get the right crop planted early, and then a lot of times it's better with a grain drill, but you can lay that crop down as a mat. It's just like you see guys on a highway, they're laying that straw matting down to help hold moisture. So then you can get very little rain and save all that moisture to grow your crop. So what you did there, that's essentially what you did. You provided cover for essentially the
Mm-hmm.
crop you wanted with an earlier planting. And we do that a lot on our sandy soils throughout our state, just one, try to build the soil, but then two, try to hold that moisture for our fall crops, which is huge. Like you said, we always get that dry spell in August, and
Mm-hmm.
plants are vulnerable. Then you get a quarter inch of rain, it's just enough to get the seed to germinate. Then you get 2 weeks of dryness, and yeah, it pretty much terminates, and there you're left with a barren wasteland.
Yeah. And I think I'm actually going to replicate that in almost all my plots moving forward, no matter what I'm putting in. I just think it's going to, even if it's beans or corn, maybe trying to put something in underneath that, uh, even if that crop fails, it gives you something else, but it'll help provide that shade that you need. Um, you mentioned sandy soil. What recommendations for people that are trying to do food plots in sandy soil? What would you recommend as far as food plot varieties or just ways to make the soil better? I know you mentioned buckwheat, but is there any other options for that?
Yeah, so I mean, sand isn't bad, just sand needs water. It doesn't matter what you do, what crop you plant. If you get a dry year, it doesn't matter the crop. It's going to struggle mightily just because it doesn't have the moisture. We see that all the time. But Like for a lot of guys that are on a budget, I'll say I really like cereal grains and sand because you could plant them in the fall. They're hardy, they don't take a lot of moisture. And if you're on a budget, you can just let them come back and like the wheat and rye will mature. You'll get a really heavy seed rate. So then you got to decide if you want to try to reincorporate that seed. But you can plant the same thing and then lay that mature rye down as cover, and it provides a really good mat and a lot of organic matter. If you want to do two crops in a season, I like buckwheat. We're going to play around a little bit with sun hemp. Like sorghum and corn probably provide the most organic matter to a food plot, but they require a lot of moisture. I don't like corn in a lot of food plot cases unless you got farm fields or some really decent acreage. So buckwheat, we played around with some cereal grains like oats, planting them in the spring. Obviously, they'll mature, but anything that you can get that will require or lay down then for your fall planting, it's adding organic matter and it's help holding moisture, and that's the best you can do. You can't control the rain. I've actually had a few guys install irrigation to ensure they get crops, but you can't make it rain. So that's about the best you can do in that situation. We played around with a lot of different liquid fertilizers, and I will say, like a liquid lime and a liquid calcium, you can apply that after everything's planted on the bare dirt, and that definitely helps hold the moisture too. I've seen some amazing crops with it versus without it in similar areas. It's like I could tell the difference, big time.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually I'm glad you brought that up because that was kind of the next area I was wanting to touch on is pH and fertilizer, and that's a huge reason why a lot of people have failed food plots. Also, just wanted to have you go in a little bit more. I know I had some years back home where our pH wasn't right, and when we got it right, it was just a tremendous difference in the palatability of the plots. The deer just preferred them a lot more. So maybe just hit on that as far as like what guys can do to make their crop so much better by just getting that pH and your fertilizer rate correct.
Yep. So, I mean, that's where you start with your soil sample. And one thing I see a lot that I would like to mention is just so say your pH is at a 5 point something, and if you send in your soil sample, usually they'll send the correction. So they'll say apply 1 ton of lime per acre. Say you got a 2 acre field. Well, they never say that this is egg lime, and a lot of guys will go buy 2 ton of Pell lime and go put it out there and hope it made the correction. Well, egg lime, if you can apply that, you can apply that 1 time and it'll make the correction. You shouldn't have to do it again for a few years or check it again. But Pell lime and liquid lime, you can't put that all down at once. You need to, I think the most any soil can uptake of Pell lime is right around 800 pounds. So if you need 2 ton to make the correction, you got to apply 5, 6, 7, 800 pounds for the next couple years as you do your crops, and it'll slowly make a correction. That's the same with liquid lime. You can't dump enough on at one time. It's going to be a few years through the process. But problem is, a lot of places can't do egg lime. You just can't get a spreader in there, and guys don't have the ability to spread it. So I see that quite a bit. But if you follow their recommendations, most soil samples will tell you fertilizer application too. It'll say 200-300 pounds per acre. Follow that. It doesn't pay to put extra down because the soil and the plants can only uptake and use so much of it. The rest is just wasted, and it's either leaching through the soil and ending up in the water, or it's leaching off the surface and ending up in a stream. So follow those recommendations to a T. It's not always more is better. And yeah, if you can make those corrections, I've definitely seen, I wouldn't call it a magic mix, but if your soil is sour, your plants are going to be sour. That'll reflect that, and I've seen that. I've seen differences of deer going to one area to the other. I think it's more when guys think they have a magic seed mix. It's no, they probably have the right soil corrections or better soil. I think some soils provide more minerals and nutrients to the plant too, and that's why deer will prefer that over other areas. And I haven't gone as far as to scientifically proven that, but I've played around with different crops enough to know that it's not what you plant, it's not the seed blend, it's more what's in your soil and what's surrounding it for crops, and there's so many other factors to it that I think the magic mix is kind of a myth.
Yeah, and yeah, that's for sure. And one other thing as far as like um, with why food plots aren't turning out. Um, it the biggest one I've noticed back home too, and I know I've had several conversations with you about this, is we just deal with a whole different, I feel like, realm of weed weeds on our property. We're in, like I said, very wet soil. They're very aquatic based weeds, and they are an absolute SOB when it comes to killing them. So maybe just touch a little bit on weed control in general, the struggles that food plotting people have with them, and ways to hopefully help control that in the future.
Yeah, that's there's two things, and remind me too after I talk on the weeds, talking about deer pressure on the plots, because I that's a big thing why plots don't turn out too that guys don't realize. But starting with weeds, we see it because we're really heavily involved all over the state, and farmers are too. But food plotters are going to start encountering it too, as we are getting a lot of Roundup resistant weeds. Like glyphosate just isn't doing it anymore, so we're revamping our programs to try to contain water hemp and some of this pigweed, and these weeds are just they're unbelievable how efficient they are, and what they can grow and control is tough. You can do, if you're more on a budget, you can do the cover crop thing. Like if you constantly have a crop there, like rye is great. It actually has a natural built-in herbicide. So there's some areas weeds are really bad. If that rye comes back in the spring, don't till it under. Just let it grow, let it mature, and it'll keep other things from growing amongst it. So that's one good way to not have fallow ground. Like try to keep crops in there to uh, to help weeds stop growing. But as soon as they get some space to grow, it doesn't matter the conditions. It can be drought, it can be raining 9 inches, a weed will still grow. That's just how efficient they are. So, yeah, they're a real problem. There's no quick, easy fix to it. Some of these areas where water hemp takes over, you got a week and a half window to try to kill it once it starts growing. And as soon as it gets a foot tall, you can't kill it. With maybe diesel fuel would do it, but you got to kill everything else too. So we're having guys, even if you started a crop, you can't let that weed go. You got to go in, redisc it, do something to get rid of it, mow it, whatever it takes. Because those weeds, one plant will produce like 3 million seeds, and once that goes, it's your whole field's covered in it, and it's a challenge. Yeah, weeds are tough. There's not a If you're trying to do it on a budget, I like having cover crops. Like try to keep something in there in the spring through the summer. Don't leave that ground fallow because you're just giving it a chance to take off. No till helps a lot. Like if you're going to keep disking, if that's the only choice you have, you do what you got to do. But if you keep incorporating the weed seed, it's going to keep growing. So cover crops
Mm-hmm.
are big, and if you can afford it, you got to go to some of these new chemical programs. Like we're going, I'm not exactly sure, but we're doing a pre-emergent and a couple different chemicals this year to try to stay on top of these Roundup resistant weeds.
That was one thing you said that was very interesting to me is you're talking about rye having a resistance to weeds. That's something I never knew that was capable in those plants. So I thought that was pretty cool. Um, you wanted to talk about deer pressure. Let's talk about deer pressure. I see it on a
Oh,
lot of food plots
yep.
um, in certain areas that I've planted. We owned a 5-acre property back when we were living in Wisconsin, and I wanted to put a bean plot in it that year, and I had about an acre and a half to plant. Put it in early June. It was coming up absolutely beautiful. The the beans got about a foot and a half to 2 feet tall, and then in about a week and a half, 2 weeks time, it was down at the ground. The deer ate it all in a matter of just a couple weeks. So I've
Yep.
definitely had this happen to me where my food plot has failed. Luckily, it was early enough where I was able to come back in and put something else in, but that doesn't always happen for people. Um, Another scenario down here this year, I was shed hunting a farm, a good friend of mine, and they're crop farmers. They leave food plots. They had several acres of beans. We went out to their shed hunt. He was telling me all about how many food plots they had, how many acres of food plots. I thought we were gonna just stack up antlers. Went in there and we found only 2 antlers on a 500-600 acre parcel. Started looking more
Nice.
at the food plots. started looking more at the food plots and trying to figure out why didn't we find more antlers in this piece. Well, based on what I could figure out, the deer already had these food plots ate well before they even shed out. So I mean, in that
Yeah,
situation, they ran out
they're
of
probably
food.
ate off by December. Yep.
Yeah. So touch on that. Like, what do you do in a situation where you're dealing with high deer density? Because I've dealt with high deer density on some of my food plots and low deer density, and it makes a dramatic difference as far as the success of your food plots.
Yeah, for sure. It actually irritates me how many times guys just they won't believe us. We'll say, yeah, we'll show up on a food plot and the guy's like, oh, why does my food plot look so terrible? And you walk out there and you can't throw a frisbee on an acre food plot and not hit a deer track and every plant snipped off and they still don't believe you. So then we'll put up growth cages and then they still don't believe you. It's like, oh, I don't get any pictures of deer. I'm like, well, they're not flying in here and UFOs taking all your crop away. This is all deer damage. So we've started doing electric fences to try to save some of the crop, and it's amazing what those will do. But the deer are smart; they figure them things out. We've had one property I had a fence up now for 3 years, and by year three, some of the local doe herd has figured it out, and they'll literally jump in between the strands one at a time to get over and into the food plot. And once they figure it out, then you got to restructure your fence because they got you nailed. But the other thing I tell so many guys, and it's it's fun to go out and see 20, 30, 40 deer on a food plot, but you got to shoot some deer. If you want your food plots to turn out, it's so important to shoot deer. Guys just don't realize it. I love seeing a lot of deer on a sit, but you got to shoot your does. And you're the best manager for your property. If you go out there and see 40 in a sit, heck, I'm shooting 15, 20 does if I can, which it's actually tough to do. But the next year, and especially with the mild winters we've been having, minus disease, all these deer, I've seen it in Wisconsin last year, and it's going to happen again this year. Like last year, the plots were the most eaten I've ever seen them all over the state, but we had such a mild winter that every doe I seen had two fawns, and I've never seen so many triplets. So it's kind of our responsibility to keep the deer in check because they'll eat you out of house and home. I mean, you could plant 15 acres and like you said, it's gone by December and you don't find any sheds on it. Well, you got way too many deer, and especially if there's no
Mm-hmm.
natural forage. They only have your food plots, and they probably have the woods ate down to nothing too. All the natural browse in the woods with that many deer is gone. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And yeah,
it's shooting
and that's
deer.
very, yeah, absolutely. Shooting deer, it's very case specific. I I've seen it on some of our family properties where like they'll tell me same situation. We're seeing 40, 50 deer a night. This is awesome. Um, but then their food plots are gone. Like same deal before the end of the season. You need to be shooting does. If you're seeing that many deer, you need to be shooting 10, 15 does or getting people in there to shoot does because if you're seeing that many does, you're not going to be seeing that many bucks.
Yep, for sure. And the other thing too, guys need to realize, like, especially if you're just new to food plotting and say year one, you go maybe hire a dozer, you plant your first food plot in an opening in the woods and it grows great that first year. Well, it takes a season for the deer to kind of get used to what's going on there. And then all of a sudden you get your local doe groups and year two, it gets demolished. And they're like, a lot of times we'll get blamed for that. They're like, oh, what'd you guys do? You didn't, it looked awesome last year and looks like crap this year. Well, you get a couple does, especially on interior good woods plots close to bedding areas. Once they know what you're doing there, and they're like, "Hey, there's food here all the time," they don't leave. They'll bed around it. You'll put a camera up, and they're eating on it at 10 a.m., noon, and all of a sudden your food plot looks like butt. And guys they never realize how much deer will sit there and eat if it's in a good location and it's convenient. So it's as time goes on, you got to up your game a little bit because once deer figure out what's going on, they're like, "Ooh, this is easy food source right next to my bedding. I'm going to start eating it earlier this year." So it's it's cool in my line of work because I get to keep going on properties. I get to keep working with guys, but it gets frustrating too because guys don't always believe me, even with my experience level. But that's why I like doing this stuff. It's fun educating guys on it.
I'm sure that's definitely the frustrating part of the job.
Yeah, for sure. I had one funny story. I had a guy for 8 years. I planted beans on. He had small food plots down in southern Wisconsin, prime time soil, like, but they would never get taller than 2 inches. I even put growth cages out. I'm like, we got to fence these. If you want beans here, we got to fence them. He finally broke down on year 9, let me put a fence up, and I grew beans up to my belly button. It's like, he's like, he hasn't questioned me since, but it only took 8 years.
Yeah, some people are just stubborn.